G'day everybody, Rob Russ here. Welcome to today's show. There was a large development in the aviation industry just last week on the 7th of December in Silicon Valley in the United States, where a company called Reliable Robotics first flew their Cessna Caravan with no people in it. Let me play the video and show you exactly what that looks like. It's kind of fun, and Damien and I are going to comment on this as we go. So the front part of the video here, I think, is quite interesting. The guy unstraps himself, so he must taxi it out onto the taxiway for some reason, because that's not part of their flight test. But he gets out, shuts the door, pulls the wheel chocks out, and the plane heads off by itself. It's the antithesis of what flying should actually be. What are your thoughts, Damo? I'm going to pause the video as we go along here and just collect your thoughts.
It's amazing, really, isn't it, that this technology is now really starting to make its way into a commercial activity. So, exciting stuff, and really looks like from all the footage from Reliable Robotics that they really had it all nutted out. I mean, if we get to, I don't know if we got a section of about us showing that landing.
Yeah. I'll let it play, but it's a bit painful to watch when I'm letting it play. And the reason I say that is because it's like perfection. It's perfect taxiing. It's perfect takeoff. He's perfectly lined up on the runway. He rotates it at the exact speed. And you look at that and think, well, why would you need a person if a robot can do it way better than that? Is that I don't know. What do you think when you see it? I think it's like awesome.
I think it's great. I mean, it's a big drone, right? At this point, it's I believe that they were up to 50 miles away from where the control station was based. So as long as that connectivity can be guaranteed, then it's this is all going to start out in the cargo arena to start with, I'd imagine. So it'll be quite quite interesting to see how that goes over a big or a longer trial period. But the signs of everything so far look good. And they've been doing this stuff. I'm not just talking about Reliable Robotics, but there's been lots of different research studies. Universities and things like that have actually been doing this, trialing this stuff over 10, 15 years.
It's not new. And the US military's been doing it for a long time with all their robotic, remotely controlled aircraft and ships and drones and everything like that.
Yeah. So I think, definitely. I think this is the future. I think, because, still today there's massive incidents still related to CFIT, controlled flight into terrain, aircraft that get, undesired aircraft states when they might enter IMC or those sorts of things. I mean, this level of automation really just takes out those risks. Because the computer doesn't know whether it's flying in cloud or whether it's doing everything based upon a GPS positioning. So amazing technology. I love it.
The really interesting thing for me is that you can go your entire career flying airplanes or helicopters or airliners or military jets, whatever you're flying, and never encounter an emergency. You might encounter something that goes wrong, but you might never encounter an emergency. And there's been numerous studies that have shown that it doesn't matter if you're a 500-hour low-time PPL like me, or you're a 5,000-hour ATP pilot. If you're faced with an emergency that you've never seen before, the way that you react to that should be based on your experience. But your experience doesn't necessarily lend itself to a positive and favorable outcome. If that was true, there'd be less accidents. But look at this Grease River landing. Unbelievable.
I know. Unbelievable. Yeah. Yeah, and look at it. I mean, it's to see the yoke going back and forth, controlling that.
It's like what I would be doing.
That's exactly what a human being or a proper pilot would be doing. Absolutely. So, good stuff.
Nice one. Let me put their website up on the screen. Folks, if you want to go and visit Reliable Robotics, the link to see them is reliable.co. So I'll put those links up on the screen there. So go over there and check them out. They got some great videos on there. Excuse me. And I just want to have a quick conversation with you, Damien, about some of the things that they're talking about there on the website. And essentially what they're talking about is that it's going to end up here anyway. no matter what happens, we have this level of automation in airliners already. And when you start looking at really sophisticated GA airplanes, they have like a really high level of automation already anyway. What about in the SR-22s that you're training people on?
Yeah.
That, do they have like automation in them at this not this level, but this type of automation?
They do. I mean, the autopilot in the Cirrus is top notch. It'll fly virtually right down to the minimum, and does it all perfectly. I mean, if you can sit there with your electronic flight bag, you can see it flying the approach just with absolute precision. And that's probably a big testament to Cirrus, because their whole philosophy is about trying to improve safety in the general aviation arena. I think the owner had an engine failure, obviously survived, and I think that's what sparked him to actually go, we need to do things better, and we need to be able to put more redundancy in there, and that's why the Cirrus also has its a dedicated ballistic parachute for the aircraft. But the automation inside that aircraft is mind-boggling. I'm still sifting through and finding new things after 4 or 5 years of flying these types of aircraft. But look, it is. I mean, I'm a true believer in thinking, well, this is the future. I mean, you take out the pilot restrictions. Aircraft all are based on a maintenance schedule. So these things can be crewed continuously, non-stop, and they, turning these aircraft into real workhorses. Hopefully that does reflect into price reductions as well, because you're actually starting to take out that human element, that that continual cost, the training, the recurrency training that companies go through in terms of keeping their pilots up to speed and qualified and so forth. So yeah, it's I think it's here to stay. How long before it takes actually passengers getting on an autonomous aircraft? I don't know. That's going to take a little bit more convincing. But there's some real applications here in terms of particularly in the cargo world, where no passengers are on board, and it is just cargo. I guess it just starts to come back to, do they start altering flight routes that are not flying over populous areas, so to reduce the risk? But yeah, yet to be seen. I think the technology's been around for a while, and I think they're just getting better and better and perfecting it. So yep.
I watched a really great video. Earlier in the week about why GA has completely failed, and it goes back through the history. It went for about 20 minutes. It was really well put together, and it's an opinion piece from somebody, of course. But what they did is they went all the way back to the end of World War II and said, at the end of World War II, there was all these pilots. There were so many people trained by the military, and then these aircraft companies recognized that, and they started building these cheap airplanes. And the cheap airplanes, everyone went, well, I could buy a little Cessna for 10 grand. I could buy that, and they already had their licenses. So it really got momentum. And then the people that didn't have a license thought, buying an airplane is really affordable. Maybe I should go and get my license. And to get a private pilot's license back in the day was sub $2,000. It was dirt cheap.
Yeah, cheap as chips. I mean, they're paying something like 10 cents a litre for fuel and things like that. So
yeah, there's all sorts of factors that were contributing to it. But it kind of shows in a ladder of escalation how it comes undone, and how regulation makes it come undone, in that suddenly they recognize that people need more training. And because there's too many accidents happening, so now we're going to bump up the cost of the training. And then now the demand for airplanes has gone away, because there's not as many people that can afford to fly, so the planes are more expensive, so that goes away. Then you have the oil crisis in the 1970s, and the cost of fuel is just skyrocketing, and everything kind of went away at the end of the 70s and early 80s. And I remember when I learned to fly at Bankstown Airport, there was like 23 flying schools there. Today, I think there's like 3 or 4 or something like that. It's just gone the way of the dodo. And the chances of that ever coming back, I think, are like zero. But this commoditizes the industry, where the level of qualification that you don't need is not the same thing. But equally on their website, if I could just put that back up on the screen, they've got some really great stuff that they talk about there. And I just want to cover off on that for a second and show you that, because as I scroll through their site, you come to this little slide just here, and I did a screen grab of it so you can see it a bit better. So let me just show you that screen grab because I think it really articulates exactly what they're talking about. So reliable robotics is a reliable autopilot, and it's our first of its kind flight control system, automates all phases of aircraft operation, including taxi, takeoff, and landing. But what they do say, and they go on to say in the videos that you watch on their site, that they're not here to replace a pilot. There's always going to be a pilot in there. So my question to you
there's
then...
also got to be a pilot in the command center monitoring and perhaps in a position to actually take over the aircraft if the systems do require it, or if there's a breakdown in communications between the receiver
and it's not what you think. It's not what you think either. And we already have the evidence, and we've seen that evidence back through the US military. So if you put one fighter pilot in an F-16 and send that guy or girl out on a sortie, it takes about 40 people in the background to actually manage everything, right? So the maintainers, when the plane comes back, it needs to be serviced and fixed and looked after and all those things, and all of the logistics that go with it. It's about 40 people. When they launch a Predator, it's about 100 people. You're like, what? How could there be more people required for something that's unmanned and it's on the other side of planet Earth? They're launching the thing from some desert base in the middle of the Middle East somewhere, and they're flying it over in Nevada, but it requires 100 people? What? When you look at the RQ-3 Global Hawk and the bigger stuff, that requires even more people again. And I think the level of sophistication that they have just lends itself to requiring more and more people. So to your point, it doesn't commoditize pilots or make it go away, but what it does do is it opens up a series of different opportunities that are not currently there. But my question to you about, as a flight instructor, does it breed complacency? If you knew that this autopilot that was in here took care of everything from startup to shutdown, and it did literally everything for you, do you think that would breed complacency? Like you're sitting in there and it's like entirely automated. I just scratch my head going, I don't think I would be complacent. I'd still be watching it like a bloody hawk.
I think, I guess until you become completely comfortable with the systems and start to rely on the systems, that's where the breakdown begins, right? So the better job it does and the more reliable it does that job, and with consistency, the more complacent that pilot would have to become, because he's just literally looking at a set of instrumentation to assess the aircraft, where it is in space and what it's doing, and monitoring all the engine parameters, and that would be quite boring, to be honest. So, and we even know that flying old Cessna 172 aircraft, where that was, well, I think it still is today, the preferred aircraft to training. And then things like the Cirrus come along, and you see the different levels of skills within the pilot sometimes as well. A lot of the Cirrus, because they do have all this automation presented to them, it's kind of hard to try and not let them use that technology, and more back to the old school ways, where you've got your map in your hand and
just a six-pack. That's all you're allowed to look at. Look out the bloody window.
Yeah, and you can do that. Like, you can turn all the bells and whistles off if you like, which is a nice feature, and sort of instill those core values and skills that every pilot should have, whether it's an aircraft that's fully autonomous or somewhere in between. If it relies on a pilot, you need to know, if that system shuts down, can I actually do the job? If not better than what I always call the autopilot George, better than what George can do. So yeah, you've always got to keep improving your skills. But I notice, hand flying skills do diminish, because people do generally go, okay, well, I'll just put it on autopilot, particularly in the cruise, right? Bang, switch it on. It's, sit back and enjoy the view. But what you miss out on is that regularly, keeping the scan going, making sure if there's anything need to be adjusted, those little tweaks that you make as you go along, power settings and, aileron and elevated trim settings. So yeah, skills do drop off, and it's going to become more and more prevalent. And so the bit that worries me about it all is, and I think there's definitely a place for autonomous aircraft, as all vehicles, on the ground and in the air. But where's the fun factor in that? Like, that's gone.
Well, that's my very next question. Does that turn prospective pilots off the industry? I was watching an interview just earlier this morning, actually, when I was having my first cup of coffee. This is my second. And it was with a fella named Nick Gray. So Nick Gray is the founder of DCS, Digital Combat Simulator, which is probably the premier military flight simulator that you could get for your desktop. And he said something really interesting about DCS. He said, the simulator is completely empty. So the idea of it is that you have these really sophisticated aircraft with all of the systems modeled, and the fun factor for you in that is learning to get really good at those systems. And when you get really good at those systems, then you can create your own missions around you, and you get really good at doing all of that. And I think that if that's where young people, let's face it, because that's where they start, man. They start in video games. They have an interest in something like that. They're looking at videos on YouTube. They're watching stuff. They're starting to get a bit interested in aviation. They've probably got a flight simulator of some description on their computer, whether that's Microsoft, DCS, or something else. It doesn't really matter. The point is, they're beginning their journey there by creating their own fun. But then the reality is always very different. Now, I've known a lot of different pilots over my career doing this podcasting stuff, and I've spoken to everybody from fighter pilots to 40,000 hour cargo pilots and everything in between type thing. And the reality in the real world is always very different to what you think it's going to be. And my first thought when I saw this reliable robotics thing was, let's face it, people are using the autopilot the whole time anyway. The airline pilot taxis out onto the runway, pushes the throttle forward, pulls up, makes one or two turns, and then presses the button. And then on final approach, once he's hooked into the ILS, he turns the autopilot off, or it probably flies all the way down to minimums, turns it off, and pulls back and flares. That's it. And at some point, they're probably just using the auto land system as well.
There's probably a few airline pilots there going, "You don't know what you're talking about, Rob. We do more than that."
And they do. They definitely do.
They do. Sure. I mean, there is more to it, and obviously they do have. When things don't go according to plan, they're obviously very skilled at what they do in a multi-crew environment. But absolutely, I think most of airline procedures do rely on automation or autopilot in their procedures.
And they should. So, they should.
Yeah, that's right. It takes
the safest way to do it.
Yeah, as long as, and this is the other thing too, it's dumb in, dumb out too. You've got to be careful when it, with autopilots as well, because that's only what you put into it is what it will do, and not always it will do what you want it to do either. So there has been quite a number of incidences where people have come unstuck due to a runaway, trim or autopilot that's gone a bit AWOL. And
I watched an air crash investigation about that very thing, where they were flying a 737-500, so old school with an INS in it. And before they pushed back from the gate and they started taxiing, they didn't get the alignment with the INS. So when they ended up in the circuit at the other end, the controller is telling them, why do you want to turn now? You need to go further downwind, you're too close. But they thought that they were 4 or 5 miles further, like if that's where they are, they thought that they were all the way over here somewhere. So there was plenty of room to turn around and to come back around and to fly that last 180 turn to line up with the runway. But it turns out there was no chance that they were actually going to make that turn. But they did the turn anyway, and then all sorts of other things snowballed and went wrong there as well. And that really has nothing to do with the autopilot. That's got to do with the INS. As they were pushing back, they didn't wait for the alignment and make that happen. So you're quite right. Dumb in, dumb out. Garbage in, garbage out. That's actually what happens. And sadly, that resulted in the loss of that entire airframe and all the people on board. Yeah.
I mean, it's catastrophic when these things happen. I mean, this is something that we teach in the series too. Is making sure that the customer or the student is fully aware of all the systems that are available to them. And the hard thing too is taking traditionally trained pilots and put them into an aircraft that has all this level of sophistication as well, because they have this, they have, the training that they, got in those days was not on these types of aircraft, and it's hard to break those new or create those new pathways and skills, particularly with older people. I'm one of those.
Well, let me tell you a funny story. Well, it was kind of not really funny. When I was studying for my commercial pilots license, I came to the nav portion of it, right? And the way that I studied for that was I bought all of the practice exam questions and I wrote out the exam questions, like hand wrote them out. And then I'd look it up in the book, I'd find it and I'd read the book, and I just went back and forth like that. And eventually I think there was 5 or 6 practice exams in this little pack that I'd bought. I'd recognized the questions and I knew the answers to all of these questions because I just did repetition. Now, it doesn't matter how you learn something. What matters is that you actually acquire the knowledge, right? So that's how I studied, and that got me through the exam. So I got into the exam and they started, the CASA exam, they go 10 minutes to set yourself up and look. And I just went past all of that. And in that 10-minute time block, I'd finished the entire exam. And I put my hand up and the lady said, what's wrong? And I said, I'm finished. She goes, but we haven't even started. And I said, yeah, I didn't even listen to that. I finished. And she goes, are you sure? And I went, mate. And I said, yep, sure. And I got 97% on it, right?
I was going to say you got 0.
But I felt like I cheated because I was just reading the exam questions, right? So the Bob Tate pack that I had helped me to get through that.
Yeah. Well, that would have been back in the day when Bob Tate used to
write the exams.
And then would write his theory books alongside
based on the exams. Yeah.
They got onto that. They wised up to that. And,
they didn't wise up for me, and I nearly aced that test. I got like 1 or 2 questions wrong. Anyway, there was a large percentage of that exam that was talking about VORs and NDBs, and I remember the year before they're like, we're going to turn all the NDBs off, and we're going to turn all the VOR off. I'm like, well, why is it in the exam still? What the hell? What is all of this about? And there wasn't a single question about GPS in there, and I remember that very distinctly.
Well, there is now, and GPS has obviously become a big part of it. And now they also, with the PPL flight test, the requirement is to demonstrate if the aircraft has the capabilities that you need to demonstrate your ability to operate those systems in the aircraft. So it's usually on the last leg. If you've kind of made it around on the last sector, that's when the testing officer generally goes, okay, everything's looking pretty good here. Now you can use the GPS and or put a flight plan in and take us home.
When I did my PPL flight test, the flying instructor was an ex. No, not quite actually. No, he was an ex RAAF. He was a Spitfire pilot, man, from World War II.
Right. Wow.
Yeah. And he just used to come out to the airport as the testing officer and help young guys like me when I was doing it. And he came out and actually had an engine failure on my flight test.
Oh, right. Wow.
Yeah. So I started up the airplane. I taxied forward a little bit. I went out onto the taxiway and I thought, what's that red ALT light? Well, that means the alternator's not working. And I just taxied back around and I parked, and he didn't say anything. And he goes, what's wrong? What are you doing? And I said, we've got an alternator failure. I'm not taking off with that. I'll see you tomorrow. I got out of the airplane and left. The next day I came back, he was there. He said, are you ready? And I said, I am. And I sat down in the airplane and I gave him all of my stuff because he wanted to look at it. And he went, huck, and he hucked it all in the back. And he said, do you remember the frequencies here at Bankstown? And I said, yeah, that's okay. And he goes, okay, take me to Cessnock. Do you know the frequency there? And I said, yeah, I do. Can I look at the map quickly? And he goes, no, but take me to Cessnock. And I had to fly to Cessnock and back to Sydney with no map and no anything, because the Spitfire pilot in World War II used to take off and just go that away. And if you know what you're doing, you know where you're going, you should be right. You should remember all this stuff. You should know all of these things. It was a hell of an experience, that's for sure. And I'm like, you sure I can't just look at the map? And he goes, you know how to get out of the lane here. You've done it like dozens of times. I know that you know how to do it. Just do it. Come on, show me. And he was a really good guy, actually. It was a really kind of fun way to do a flight test.
Yeah, that's different.
Yeah. I don't think he'd get away with that these days.
No. Cass is kind of really bunkered down on a lot of that now. And, it's there's a set of clear obstructions and criteria that you've got to tick and flick, if you like.
And I think he had all of that in his head. If this guy can get me from here to here, he can tick he ticks all the boxes. Yeah, that's what it is. It's like that. So.
There's still a few of those old guys around. Fewer and further between now, but it's all very much by the book these days.
You'll be one of those old guys soon.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if I want to go down that testing route.
No.
I actually would like to do more just fun flying.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So what I would say to that final question there on the screen, would it turn prospective pilots off the industry, all of this automation? I would say don't let it. Flying airplanes and helicopters is like the single most fun thing that you could possibly do. And especially if you've got a deep passion and understanding for that. And that's something that's really driving you on the inside. Whether or not you want to be a private pilot like me or you want to be a proper commercial pilot like Damien, I would encourage you wholeheartedly to experience that and to get it out of your system, because you don't want to turn 35 years old and go, damn, I wish I had always done something that I wanted to do. Just go and dive in and have a crack at it, because it's a very, very rewarding profession. And it's certainly, I know from my experience, it's a very rewarding hobby as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, pilots you can't take pilots out of the equation.
No, you never will be able to. Yeah.
No, not totally.
No one's ever going to get on a plane without a pilot. I think we're a little while away from that actually happening. And the folks over at Reliable say that as well. This is not designed to replace pilots. It's designed to enhance their safety. Ladies and gentlemen, that wraps it up for this show. Don't forget to share your comments. Let us know what you think about all of this automation. Let us know what you think about Reliable Robotics, and we'd love to engage with you in the conversation. So make sure you put all the comments down below, and Damien and I will get back to you. All right, that wraps it up for this one. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.